Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting way back past the Renaissance drama, past the medieval chaos, past even the Roman nonsense, all the way to ancient Egypt. Specifically, we're going to follow around someone who had one of the strangest jobs in human history, an Egyptian doctor. Now, I know what you're thinking, a doctor, that sounds boring. But trust me, these people dealt with constipation remedies involving crocodile dung, performed surgery with copper knives, and genuinely believed that your heart did all your thinking. So, settle in, dim those lights, and let us meander through a typical day for someone trying to practice medicine in a world where medical knowledge was equal parts brilliant observation and absolute fever dream. Our physician's name is Parasites. Well, actually, let's call him Urge. That's a real name from the period, and it means milk. Yes, this grown man who will be elbow deep in various human fluids by lunchtime was named after a dairy product. Egypt was like that. Urge lives in Thebes, around 1500 BCE, during the New Kingdom. He's what we'd call a Senoi, the Egyptian word for physician. He's not a priest-physician, mind you. Those are the fancy ones who get to work in the temples and smell like incense all day. No, Urge is more of a general practitioner. He makes house calls. He deals with the common people. He's seen things. It's early morning, and the sun is just starting to turn the Nile into a ribbon of bronze. Urge wakes up in his modest mud brick house. His wife is already up, grinding barley for bread, because that's what everyone ate in ancient Egypt: bread and beer, morning, noon, and night. Sometimes onions, if you were feeling fancy. Urge sits up on his sleeping mat and immediately checks his body for scorpions, because of course that's a thing you have to do. Egypt, beautiful, ancient, and packed with things that want to sting you. He performs his morning ablutions, which mostly involves splashing some water on his face from a basin. Soap exists, sort of. It's made from animal fat and ash, and it smells about as pleasant as you'd imagine. Urge then puts on his simple linen kilt. If he were richer, he might have a longer robe, maybe even a wig. Egyptian elites loved their wigs, but Urge keeps his head shaved, like most people, because lice were the absolute plague of the ancient world. Nothing says professional medical authority like a bald head glistening with castor oil. Breakfast is bread, surprising no one. Maybe some dates if they're in season. Urge washes it down with beer, which sounds decadent until you realize that Egyptian beer was thick, gritty, and had about the alcohol content of a sad kombucha. It was basically liquid bread. You didn't drink it to get drunk, you drank it because the Nile water would absolutely wreck you otherwise. After breakfast, Urge gathers his supplies. His medical kit is a woven basket containing a copper knife, a few bronze needles, some linen bandages, a grinding stone, and several small pots. Those pots are filled with ingredients he'll need for remedies. One contains honey, which is actually brilliant. Honey has antibacterial properties. Another contains natron, a kind of natural salt used for drying things out. And then there's the pot of animal dung. Yes, dung. Crocodile dung is particularly prized, though donkey dung will do in a pinch. We'll get to why shortly. Spoiler: the Egyptians did not understand microbiology. Urge's first patient of the day is a farmer named Hetty. Hetty lives about a 20-minute walk away, through dusty streets lined with mud brick houses that all look basically identical. Everyone's awake now. Women are washing clothes in the canal. Children are chasing each other around, naked, because clothes were expensive, and kids are messy. A few donkeys bray in the distance. It's hot. It's always hot. Egypt has 2 seasons, hot and slightly less hot. Hetty is lying on a mat inside his home, looking miserable. His wife explains that he's been complaining of stomach pain for 3 days. He can't keep food down. He's feverish. Urge kneels beside him and begins his examination. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Egyptian doctors had surprisingly sophisticated diagnostic techniques. Urge checks Hetty's pulse not at the wrist like we do, but at several points on the body, because Egyptians believed in a system of channels called metu that carried blood, air, and other fluids throughout the body. They weren't entirely wrong. They'd just mixed up some of the details. Urge also presses gently on Hetty's abdomen, watching for where the pain is worst. He looks at Hetty's eyes, checks his tongue, even smells his breath. Ancient Egyptian doctors were keen observers. They couldn't see germs or viruses, obviously, but they could spot patterns. They knew that certain symptoms clustered together. They kept records. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the longest medical documents from this period, lists over 800 remedies. These people were trying. Urge concludes that Hetty is suffering from a demon of the belly. Now, to be fair, this could be anything from food poisoning to appendicitis to intestinal parasites, which were horrifyingly common because, again, the Nile was basically a sewage highway. But Urge doesn't know about bacteria. He knows about demons, and the treatment for demons is, well, it's complicated. First, practical measures. Urge prepares a remedy of honey, milk, and crushed juniper berries. He mixes it into a paste and has Hetty swallow it. The honey might actually help. It's soothing, antimicrobial. The juniper, who knows? But it can't hurt, probably. Then comes the part where things get weird. Urge pulls out a small amulet depicting the goddess Sekhmet, who is both the bringer and healer of plagues, because Egyptian gods were nothing if not complicated. He places this on Hetty's chest and mutters an incantation. The incantation is meant to drive out the demon. It goes something like, "Flow out, evil one. The son of Ra has spoken. Sekhmet will devour you." Does it work? Well, if Hetty has food poisoning, he'll probably feel better in a day or two, regardless. If it's something serious, well, we'll just say that mortality rates were not great. But Urge is doing his best with the knowledge available to him. And honestly, the psychological comfort of a ritual, the presence of a calm authority figure, the honey, these things aren't nothing. Urge leaves instructions with Hetty's wife to keep him hydrated and cool, and to send for him if the fever worsens. Then he heads to his next patient. This one is a construction worker who's injured his hand. A stone block slipped during the building of a minor temple extension, and the man's fingers got caught. Two of them are clearly broken. This is more in Urge's wheelhouse. Broken bones, the Egyptians understood. They set fractures with wooden splints and linen wrappings. Urge examines the hand carefully. The breaks are clean, which is good. No bone is poking through the skin, which is very good, because open fractures in the ancient world were basically a death sentence via infection. Urge straightens the fingers as best he can. This part hurts, and the worker grits his teeth and swears creatively and then splints them, using two small, smooth pieces of wood. He wraps the whole thing tightly with linen bandages that he's soaked in a resin mixture. As it dries, it'll harden, creating something not unlike a modern cast. He tells the man to keep the hand elevated and to avoid work for at least a month. The man looks horrified at this. A month without work means no pay, and he has a family to feed, but Urge is firm. Use the hand too soon, and it'll heal crooked. Then you'll be useless forever. The man reluctantly agrees. It's now mid-morning, and the sun is climbing higher. Urge is sweating through his linen kilt. He stops by a small market to buy some fresh garlic and coriander. Both are used in various remedies, but honestly, he's also going to eat them because Egyptian food, while carnivore, was not particularly exciting. He chats with the garlic seller, who mentions that her daughter has a persistent cough. Urge makes a mental note to stop by later. His next patient is a teenage girl with an eye infection. Eye problems were incredibly common in Egypt. The wind constantly blew sand and dust into people's faces. The flies were relentless and carried all sorts of nastiness. Trachoma, a bacterial infection, was endemic. This girl's eyes are red, swollen, and crusted with discharge. She's clearly miserable. Urge has a treatment for this, and it's actually not terrible. He mixes a paste of ground malachite green copper ore with honey and animal fat. Malachite contains copper, which has mild antimicrobial properties. He gently applies this paste to the girl's eyelids and tells her mother to reapply it twice a day. He also suggests washing the eyes with clean water and keeping flies away as much as possible. It's not antibiotics, but it's something. If she's lucky, the infection will clear up. If she's unlucky, well, blindness was not uncommon. By noon, Urge is exhausted, and he's only halfway through his day. He stops at a shaded spot near the river to eat lunch. More bread, some dried fish, a handful of dates. He watches a group of children playing in the shallows, splashing and laughing. He thinks about his own children. He has 3, all under the age of 10. 2 are healthy. 1, his youngest son, has been sickly since birth. Weak lungs, frequent fevers. Urge has tried everything. Amulets, incantations, remedies, made from bizarre ingredients. Nothing seems to help. This is the quiet tragedy of being a physician in the ancient world. You know so much, and yet you can save so few. After lunch, Urge is summoned to a wealthier household. A merchant's wife is in labor, and there are complications. Childbirth is one of the most dangerous moments in any ancient Egyptian woman's life. Maternal mortality rates were staggering. Infant mortality was even worse. Urge arrives to find the woman in significant distress. The midwife, a grizzled, no-nonsense woman named Nephrites, already there, and she looks worried. The baby is breech. Urge can tell from the way the woman's belly is shaped, from the position of the pain. This is bad, very bad. Breech births in the ancient world often ended with both mother and child dying. But Nephrit is experienced, and between the two of them, they try to turn the baby. Urge places his hands on the woman's abdomen, feeling for the baby's position, and gently, carefully, tries to coax it around. It's a delicate process, and the woman is screaming. Her husband is pacing outside, pale and terrified. After what feels like an eternity, the baby shifts. It's not perfect, but it's better. Nephrit takes over, guiding the woman through the pushing. Urge prepares a knife, just in case he needs to perform an emergency delivery, cutting the mother open to save the child. It's a last resort, and the mother almost never survives, but sometimes it's the only option. Fortunately, it doesn't come to that. After another hour of labor, the baby is born. A girl. She's small, blue, and silent. Urge heart sinks. But then Nephrit slaps the baby's back, hard, and the infant lets out a thin, reedy wail. The room collectively exhales. The mother is bleeding more than Urge would like, but it's not a hemorrhage. Nephrit packs the birth canal with linen and applies pressure. They wait. The bleeding slows. The baby continues to cry, which is the best sound in the world right now. The merchant, when he's allowed back in, is so relieved he offers Urge a payment of grain and a small jar of very good beer. Urge accepts gratefully. He's too tired to feel triumphant. He just feels grateful. One more person who didn't die today. By late afternoon, Urge is back on the streets, making his rounds. He stops by the garlic seller's house to check on the daughter with the cough. The girl is thin, pale, and the cough is wet and rattling. Urge suspects it's a lung infection, possibly tuberculosis, though he doesn't have a word for that. He prepares a remedy of honey mixed with crushed poppy seeds, which will at least help her sleep and suppress the cough a little. But he knows, deep down, that this is one he probably can't fix. He gives the mother the remedy and squeezes her shoulder gently. She knows too. His last patient of the day is an older man with a rash. It's covering his arms and torso, angry and red. Urge examines it closely. It could be an allergic reaction. It could be a fungal infection from the humidity. It could be any number of things. He decides to treat it with a paste made from ground fenugreek and animal fat, and tells the man to avoid scratching it. He also suggests washing with natron, which will dry out the skin. It's a guess, really. So much of medicine is guessing, trying, and hoping. By the time Urge gets home, the sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His wife has dinner ready. Surprise. It's bread along with some roasted onions and a bit of fish. They eat together while the children chatter about their day. His youngest coughs several times during the meal. Urge tries not to let his worry show. After dinner, Urge sits outside for a while, watching the stars emerge. The Egyptians are obsessed with the stars. They navigate by them, plant crops by them, build temples aligned with them. Urge doesn't fully understand the priestly calculations, but he likes the constancy of the night sky. It's the same every night, predictable and vast. He thinks about his day, Hetty who might recover or might not. the construction worker with the broken hand, who will probably be fine, the girl with the eye infection, who could go either way, the merchant's wife and her baby, who survived against the odds, the garlic seller's daughter, who probably won't see next winter. This is the rhythm of his life: small victories, frequent losses, and the stubborn, exhausting work of trying to help. Before bed, Urge says a quiet prayer to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, and to Sekhmet, the goddess of healing. He asks them to guide his hands tomorrow, to help him see clearly, to grant him just a little more knowledge. Then he lies down on his mat, next to his wife, and falls asleep to the sound of the Nile moving endlessly past. And that's a day. Not glamorous, not heroic. Just a man with a basket of questionable remedies, doing his best in a world that doesn't yet understand germs, or antibiotics, or the fact that maybe crocodile dung is not the miracle cure they think it is. Let's drift a little deeper now into what exactly these ancient Egyptian doctors believed, and why their medical practice was such a fascinating mix of the brilliant and the utterly baffling. So, if you're still with me, and I hope you are, because things are about to get weirder, let's talk about what ancient Egyptian doctors actually believed about the human body, because understanding their worldview really makes the crocodile dung thing make, well, not sense exactly, but at least you can see the logic. The ancient Egyptians, like most ancient civilizations, didn't have a microscope. They didn't know about cells, or bacteria, or viruses, or DNA. What they did have was observation. They could see that when you cut someone open, and they cut people open a lot, thanks to mummification, there were tubes and vessels inside. Blood flowed through some of them. They could see the heart pumping. They could see that when someone died, everything stopped. From this, they developed a theory. The heart, they decided, was the center of everything, not the brain. The brain was just there, useless meat, basically. When they mummified someone, they'd pull the brain out through the nose with a hook and throw it away. The brain was irrelevant, but the heart had to be preserved carefully, because the heart was where you thought, felt, remembered, and made decisions. It was the seat of the soul. This makes a certain amount of sense if you think about it. Your heart rate changes when you're scared, or excited, or in love. It pounds when you run. It's the most obviously active organ in your body. The brain just sits there, quietly, doing its thing without any obvious drama. So, naturally, the Egyptians assumed the heart was in charge. They also believed in those channels I mentioned earlier, the metu. They thought these channels carried not just blood, but also air, water, and other vital fluids throughout the body. This is not wildly different from later Greek ideas about humors, or even some aspects of Chinese medicine. It's a pretty reasonable guess. Actually, if you don't have modern anatomy to guide you, they knew that if a channel got blocked, like if you had a blood clot or something, bad things happened. They just didn't know why. This belief in channels and blockages is why so many Egyptian remedies involved purging. They wanted to clear things out, get the bad stuff flowing out of the body. Hence, laxatives. So many laxatives. Castor oil was a favorite. Colocynth, a desert plant, was used to induce vomiting and diarrhea. The idea was that if you could flush the system, you'd flush out the disease. And this is where the dung comes in. Bear with me. The Egyptians noticed that when you gave someone a powerful laxative, they often felt better afterward. They didn't understand that this was mostly because whatever was bothering them had run its course, or because they were now too dehydrated to notice their other symptoms. They thought the purging itself was curative. So, they started looking for the most powerful purging agents they could find. And what's more likely to give you explosive diarrhea than consuming animal feces? Nothing. That's what crocodile dung was particularly prized, because crocodiles were sacred animals associated with the god Sobek. If you're going to consume dung, it might as well be holy dung. Did this work? No, absolutely not. In fact, it probably made a lot of people sicker because surprise feces are full of pathogens. But the Egyptians didn't know that. They just knew that sometimes people got better after treatment, and sometimes they didn't. And they were trying to figure out which interventions helped. It's pre-scientific medicine. It's throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. But here's the thing, they weren't stupid. Not even close. The surgical side of Egyptian medicine was actually incredibly advanced. Remember, urge setting that broken bone. The Egyptians were genuinely skilled at orthopedics. They could set fractures, splint limbs, and even perform trepanation drilling, holes in the skull. We've found skulls with healed trepanation holes, which means the patient survived the procedure. That's remarkable. That requires understanding anatomy, having steady hands, and knowing how to prevent infection even if they didn't understand why their methods worked. They also did surprisingly sophisticated dental work. They could drain abscesses. They made dental bridges out of gold wire. Tooth decay was rampant because of all that bread. Ancient Egyptian bread was full of sand and grit from the grinding stones, and it just wrecked people's teeth. But the Egyptians did what they could, and their wound care was legitimately good. Honey, which they used constantly, is actually an excellent wound dressing. It's antibacterial. It keeps wounds moist, and it promotes healing. Modern medicine has rediscovered honey as a treatment for burns and chronic wounds. The Egyptians were onto something. They also used moldy bread on wounds. Now, you might think, oh, that's where they accidentally discovered penicillin. And, maybe, possibly, some scholars think there's a chance that certain molds growing on bread might have had antibiotic properties, but it's more likely that the Egyptians just thought mold was a sign of decay, and decay fights decay, or something. The logic is murky, but accidentally, they might have stumbled onto something useful. The Ebers Papyrus, which I mentioned earlier, is a wild document. It's over 20 meters long and contains remedies for everything from headaches to depression to incontinence to what we'd now call erectile dysfunction. Some of the remedies are sensible. For a burn, apply a poultice of aloe. Aloe is great for burns. We still use it. Other remedies are less sensible. For baldness, apply a mixture of lion fat, hippopotamus fat, crocodile fat, cat fat, snake fat, and ibex fat. First of all, where are you getting lion fat? How do you render fat from a lion without getting eaten? Second, this is clearly magical thinking. The logic seems to be that if you apply the essence of powerful, hairy animals to your head, your hair will grow back. It won't, but I admire the optimism. There's also a lot of magical medicinal crossover. Many remedies include both physical ingredients and spoken incantations. You'd prepare a poultice, apply it, and then recite a spell to activate it. The spell might invoke a god, or tell a mythological story about how the gods healed each other. The idea was that by retelling the story, you were recreating the divine healing. It's sympathetic magic, and it's not unique to Egypt. Most ancient cultures did this. The line between medicine and magic was blurry, if it existed at all. Let's talk about a specific condition the Egyptians were obsessed with, the ukadu. This was their catch-all term for any kind of internal rot or corruption. It could mean an infection, or gangrene, or cancer, or just any mysterious illness where someone wasted away. The Egyptians believed that ukadu originated in the bowels and then spread through the metu to the rest of the body. Hence, again, the obsession with purging. Clear out the bowels, stop the rot from spreading. They weren't entirely wrong. Gut health is connected to overall health. We know now that the gut microbiome affects everything from immunity to mental health. The Egyptians just took it too far. They thought everything came from the bowels. Headache, probably bowels. Fever, bowels. Paranoia, definitely bowels. The solution was always purge. Now, our friend Urchi's not thinking about all of this consciously as he goes about his day. He learned medicine the way most Egyptians learned their trades, through apprenticeship. He probably started following his father or an uncle around when he was young, watching, helping, gradually being trusted with more responsibility. There were medical schools attached to some temples where you could study the papyri and learn from master physicians, but those were for the elite. Urge learned by doing. He's memorized dozens of remedies. He knows which plants to pick and when. He knows how to mix a poultice, set a bone, deliver a baby. He knows the incantations, the prayers, the proper way to address a god. And he knows, though he'd never admit it out loud, that a lot of what he does doesn't work. He's seen too many people die despite his best efforts, but he keeps trying because what else is there? You do what you can with what you have. Let's drift now to something that Urge probably has nightmares about: parasites. Ancient Egypt was absolutely infested with parasites, and they made everyone's life miserable. If you thought the dung remedies were bad, just wait until you hear about the actual medical conditions ancient Egyptians had to deal with on a daily basis. Because Egypt, beautiful, majestic Egypt, land of pyramids and pharaohs, was also an absolute petri dish of tropical diseases and parasitic infections. Living next to the Nile was convenient for farming and transportation, but it also meant living in close proximity to some of the most horrifying organisms nature has ever devised. Let's start with stomius. This is a disease caused by parasitic flatworms that live in freshwater snails. The larval form of the worm is released into the water, and when humans wade into the river, which in Egypt was basically unavoidable, the larvae burrow through the skin, just drill right in. Then they migrate through the bloodstream to the liver and intestines, where they mature into adult worms and start reproducing. The eggs are released into the urine and feces, perpetuating the cycle. Symptoms include abdominal pain, bloody urine, and chronic fatigue. Left untreated, it can cause liver damage, kidney failure, bladder cancer. It's debilitating. And in ancient Egypt, it was everywhere. We've found calcified schistosome eggs in Egyptian mummies. Some estimates suggest that over half the population was infected at any given time. Now, Urge doesn't know about flatworms or larval stages. What he knows is that people constantly have bloody urine. It's so common that some scholars think the Egyptians might have considered it a normal part of male puberty like menstruation for men. There's some debate about this, but the point is, it was everywhere, and urged treatments for it probably involved, you guessed it, purging. Maybe some herbal remedies to reduce inflammation, but nothing that would actually kill the worms. Then there's guinea worm. This is a truly nightmarish parasite. You contract it by drinking water that contains tiny infected water fleas. The larva is released in your stomach, burrows through your intestinal wall, and migrates through your body. About a year later, the worm, now up to 3 feet long, slowly emerges through your skin, usually on the leg or foot. The traditional way to remove it is to wrap the emerging end around a stick and slowly, over days or weeks, wind it out. Pull too fast, and the worm breaks, leading to infection. This process is agonizing, and there's evidence of it in ancient Egypt. Some scholars think the rod of Asclepius the iconostic, that S, now a symbol of medicine, might actually be a stylized representation of the guinea worm removal process. Medicine and horror intertwine from the very beginning. Urge has definitely treated guinea worm. He's probably spent hours sitting with patients, carefully winding these disgusting parasites out of their flesh, trying to keep the wound clean, applying honey to prevent infection. It's one of those tasks that requires patience, a strong stomach, and the ability to not visibly gag while doing it. And then there are the mosquitoes. Egypt had malaria, probably several types. Mosquitoes breed in standing water, and the Nile floods annually, leaving behind perfect breeding grounds. Malaria causes cyclical fevers, chills, anemia, and in severe cases, death. Children were especially vulnerable. Urge has treated countless cases of fever that he attributes to demons or bad air. Malaria literally means bad air in Italian, so that tradition goes way back, but he doesn't know about the mosquitoes. He just knows that people get sick, especially during and after the flood season. For malaria-like fevers, Egyptian doctors used willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, so that actually helped with the fever and pain. They also used chrysanthemum flowers, which might have had some anti-malarial properties, though probably not enough to cure anyone. Mostly, you just hoped the person's immune system was strong enough to fight it off. Let's not forget the intestinal worms, tapeworms, roundworms, hookworms. Hookworms, Egypt had them all. These are contracted from contaminated food and water, and they cause malnutrition, anemia, abdominal pain, and general misery. Some tapeworms can grow to over 30 feet long, just living in your intestines, absorbing your nutrients. The Egyptians knew about these because they saw them in feces. They called them worms of the belly and treated them with various purgatives and plant extracts. Some of these treatments might have actually worked. Pomegranate bark, for example, was used as a dewormer, and it contains compounds that are mildly toxic to parasites. But here's the grim reality. In a world without sanitation, without clean water, without understanding of how parasites spread, you couldn't really win. You could treat an individual case, but the person would just get reinfected. It was an endless cycle. Urge probably spends a significant portion of his time treating symptoms rather than curing diseases. He's making people comfortable. He's easing pain. He's buying time and hoping the body's own defenses will kick in. That's most of what pre-modern medicine was: supportive care. Skin infections were also rampant. Bacterial infections, fungal infections, all made worse by the heat, the humidity, the lack of antibiotics. A small cut could become infected and kill you. Urge knows this. He's meticulous about wound cleaning. He uses honey. He uses clean linen. He tells people to keep wounds covered and dry. But sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes the infection wins. And then there are the diseases we can't even diagnose anymore. Ancient sources mention mysterious plagues and mass die-offs. Were these influenza, typhus, smallpox? We don't know. The Egyptians didn't leave detailed enough medical records to say for sure. But we know that epidemics happened, and when they did, doctors like Urge were completely helpless. All they could do was burn incense to drive away the evil spirits and pray to Sekhmet to lift her wrath. There's something profoundly sad about this. Urge is intelligent, observant, and dedicated, but he's working with Stone Age knowledge. He's fighting invisible enemies with tools that barely work, and he knows it. There's a text from ancient Egypt, a sort of medical treatise, that includes sections with phrases like, "an ailment not to be treated," or "an ailment I will fight." The Egyptians were honest about their limitations. They knew there were conditions they couldn't help with. Imagine being Urge, going to see a patient, examining them, and realizing this is one of the not-to-be-treated cases. You still offer what comfort you can. Maybe you bring an amulet. Maybe you say a prayer. Maybe you prepare a soothing drink that won't cure anything but will at least help them sleep. You sit with the family. You witness their grief. And then you move on to the next patient, because there's always a next patient. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The Egyptians did live long lives by ancient standards. If you survived childhood, which was a big if, many people made it into their 50s and 60s, some even into their 70s. We have records of elderly physicians and scribes, so clearly some people were doing something right. Diet probably helped. The Egyptian diet was mostly vegetarian: bread, beer, vegetables, some fish. Not a lot of meat, which meant lower cholesterol and less heart disease than you might expect. The climate was brutal, but at least diseases like tuberculosis, which thrived in cold, damp environments, were somewhat less common than in Northern Europe. And the constant exposure to diseases probably meant that survivors developed some level of immunity. Evolution in action, though at a terrible cost. Let's drift over now to the social side of being a doctor in ancient Egypt. Because Urge's job isn't just about medicine, it's also about navigating a complex social hierarchy. So here's the thing about being a physician in ancient Egypt. Your social status was complicated. You weren't a slave or a peasant, which was good, but you also weren't nobility. You were somewhere in the middle, in that ambiguous zone of craftsmen and specialists who had valuable skills but no real power. Urge is respected in his community. People are polite to him. They pay him usually in goods like grain, beer, bread, occasionally a nice cut of fish or some oil. Egypt didn't really use money the way we think of it. There were no coins yet. Everything was barter. So Urge's compensation is essentially whatever his patients can afford to give him, which varies wildly depending on their own circumstances. When he successfully delivers a baby or sets a broken bone that heals straight, the family remembers. They speak well of him. Maybe they give him a little extra next time. When someone dies despite his best efforts, which happens often. Well, that's harder. Some families understand, others blame him. A few might whisper that he didn't pray hard enough, or used the wrong incantation, or maybe angered the gods somehow. Urge has learned to let these accusations roll off him. Mostly, he's not wealthy, but he's not poor either. His family has enough to eat. His children are learning to read and write, which is huge. Literacy was rare. Only about 1% of the population could read, mostly scribes and priests. But Urge knows that knowledge is power, so he's teaching his oldest son the basics of hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphics used for everyday documents. Maybe the boy will become a physician too, or maybe a scribe, which would be even better. Scribes didn't have to deal with blood and dung. Urge's relationship with the temple physicians is professionally cordial, but slightly tense. The temple physicians are higher status. They serve in the houses of life attached to major temples, where they study sacred texts and prepare medicines for priests and nobles. They wear fine linen and smell like myrrh. They never have to make house calls to a farmer's mud brick hovel. Urge finds them a bit pretentious, if he's being honest. But he also knows they have access to knowledge he doesn't. Rare texts, recipes passed down from master to student over generations. Once or twice a year, there's a gathering of physicians at the temple. It's not exactly a medical conference, but it serves a similar purpose. Physicians from the region share observations, discuss difficult cases, trade remedies. Urge attends when he can. He's learned useful things at these gatherings. Last year, an older physician from Memphis demonstrate continue 1831, a new technique for draining abscesses with a bronze lancet. Urge has used it several times since. It works better than his old method, but there's also an element of competition. Who has the most successful cures? Who's been called to treat a noble? Who's earned the most in offerings? Urge mostly stays out of these status games. He's here to learn, not to posture. Speaking of nobles, Urge has treated a few wealthier patients over the years. There's a local overseer of granaries who calls for him whenever his children are sick. The man can afford to pay in grain, and he's generous about it, so Urge makes these house calls a priority. The overseer's home is much nicer than the typical farmer's dwelling. Plastered walls painted with murals, wooden furniture, a small courtyard with a garden. The children are plump and healthy looking, which is always a good sign. But even wealth couldn't always save you in ancient Egypt. The overseer's youngest daughter died of a fever last year. Urge tried everything: cooling baths, herb-infused drinks, incantations, amulets. Nothing worked. The girl just burned and burned until she didn't anymore. The overseer didn't blame Urge. He understood that some things were beyond human control. But Urge still felt the weight of that failure. He always does. Has Urge ever been called to treat someone truly elite? A high-ranking priest, perhaps, or even a minor royal? Once, a few years ago, a regional administrator was passing through Thebes and developed severe abdominal pain. His regular physician wasn't available, so someone recommended Urge. This was terrifying. If the man died under Urge's care, there could be serious consequences, accusations of negligence, or worse. Urge examined the man carefully. The pain was localized to the lower right side of the abdomen. It was tender to the touch. The man had a fever. Urge suspected an inflamed gut, what we'd call appendicitis. This was very bad. If the inflamed organ burst, the man would almost certainly die of infection. But there was nothing Urge could do surgically. Egyptian medicine hadn't figured out abdominal surgery. Opening the body cavity was a death sentence. So Urge did what he could. He prepared cooling poultices to try to reduce the inflammation. He gave the man poppy seed tea to ease the pain and help him sleep. He prayed a lot, and then the man got better. Maybe it was divine intervention. Maybe the appendix was only mildly inflamed and settled down on its own. Maybe Urge just got incredibly lucky. But the administrator recovered, and he paid Urge with a gold ring. Actual gold. Urge still has it. He's never worn it. Too valuable, too risky, but he keeps it hidden in his home as a sort of emergency reserve. The psychological burden of being a physician is something Urge thinks about more as he gets older. He's seen so much death. infants who never took their first breath, children burning with fever, women bleeding out in childbirth, men crushed in construction accidents or bitten by snakes, the elderly wasting away from diseases he can't name. It wears on you. Some physicians, he's heard, turn to beer or wine to cope. They drink until they can't remember the faces anymore. Urge hasn't gone that route. Instead, he focuses on the small victories. The baby who did breathe, the child whose fever broke, the woman who survived childbirth, the man who walked away from the accident. These moments keep him going. They're a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, the odds tip in your favor. He's also developed a philosophy of sorts, though he wouldn't call it that. He thinks of himself as a servant of math, a concept of cosmic order, balance, and truth that the Egyptians held sacred. His job isn't to conquer death. Death is part of the natural order. His job is to maintain balance, to ease suffering, to give people a fighting chance. Whether they live or die is ultimately up to the gods. All he can do is try. This mindset helps him sleep at night. Mostly, there are still nights when he lies awake, thinking about patients he couldn't save, wondering if there was something else he could have done, some incantation he forgot, some remedy he didn't try. But then dawn comes, and there are new patients to see, and he gets up and does it all over again. Let's drift now into the stranger side of Egyptian medicine, the protective amulets, the magical spells, and the thin line between physician and magician. Here's where things get truly weird, though by now you're probably used to that. In ancient Egypt, there was no firm boundary between medicine and magic, none at all. In fact, trying to separate the two would have seemed bizarre to someone like Urge. Of course, medicine involved spells. Of course, you invoked the gods. How else were you supposed to heal anyone? Let's talk about amulets. These were everywhere in ancient Egypt. Small carved objects, usually made of stone, ceramic, or metal, often depicting gods or sacred animals or symbols. People wore them around their necks, on their wrists, sometimes sewn into their clothing. They were believed to offer protection against disease, injury, evil spirits, and general bad luck. The most common amulet was the Eye of Horus, also called the Wedget. It represented healing and protection. The story goes that Horus, the falcon-headed god, lost his eye in a battle with Set, the god of chaos. The god Thoth magically restored the eye, making it whole again. So the Eye of Horus symbolized restoration and healing. People wore it hoping for the same divine intervention in their own ailments. Urge carries several of these amulets with him. When he treats a patient, especially one with a serious condition, he'll often place an amulet on them on their chest, or around their neck and recite a spell. The spell usually invokes Horus or Thoth or Sekhmet, asking them to do for this person what they did in the myths. It's sympathetic magic. By recreating the story, you recreate the outcome. Did this help? Psychologically, probably. The placebo effect is real. If a patient believed the amulet would protect them, they might relax, which could lower stress hormones, which could potentially boost immune function. Modern science has documented all of this. But of course, Urge doesn't know about immune function or placebos. He just knows that sometimes people feel better after receiving an amulet, and that's good enough. There were also amulets specifically for protection during childbirth. Small carvings of the goddess Toret, who was depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright. Hippos were fierce, protective mothers, so Toret was invoked to guard women and children during the dangerous process of childbirth. A woman in labor might clutch a Toret amulet, or have one placed on her belly, while the midwife and physician worked. Then there were the spells. Oh, the spells. Egyptian medical texts are full of them. Some are quite beautiful, in a strange way. There's one spell for treating a burn that goes something like, "The fire is extinguished. The flame of the furnace is smothered, it shall not spread. O burn, go forth. The son of Ra has commanded it." You'd recite this while applying a cooling salve of aloe and honey. The idea was that the words had power. They commanded reality to change. Another spell, used for protecting children from illness, went flow out. You who come in darkness, who enter in stealth. Do you come to kiss this child? I will not let you kiss him. Do you come to harm him? I will not let you harm him. This would be recited while placing protective amulets around a child's bed. It's almost a lullaby, in a way. A fierce, loving declaration of protection against the unseen dangers of the night. Urge has memorized dozens of these spells. He learned them from his mentor, who learned them from his mentor, stretching back generations. Some of them are probably ancient even by Egyptian standards, passed down orally for centuries before being written on papyrus. The words have weight. When Urge recites a spell, he does so with gravity and intention. He's not just going through the motions. He believes, on some level, that the words matter. Now, there were also specialists who dealt primarily in magic, the Heka practitioners. These were more like sorcerers or magicians than physicians. They didn't set bones or deliver babies. Instead, they dealt with curses, evil spirits, and supernatural afflictions. If you thought someone had cursed you, or that a demon was tormenting you, you'd go to a Heka practitioner, not a physician. But the lines were blurry. Some physicians, like Urge, incorporated magical elements into their practice. Some Heka practitioners knew a bit of practical medicine, and then there were the priest-physicians who were fully versed in both. These were the ones attached to major temples, and they were considered the most powerful healers because they combined medical knowledge with priestly authority and magical prowess. Urge respects these priest-physicians, but he's also slightly skeptical of the more extreme magical claims. He's seen too many cases where all the spells and amulets in the world didn't help. He's pragmatic. He uses magic because it's part of the tradition and because it offers comfort to patients, but he doesn't rely on it exclusively. He combines it with practical treatments, wound cleaning, bandaging, herbal remedies, rest, hydration. The magic is the seasoning, not the meal. There's a particular type of magical object Urge sometimes encounters: curse tablets. These are small pieces of pottery or metal inscribed with curses, usually asking the gods to harm a specific person. They were sometimes buried near a person's home, or thrown into wells, or left at temple entrances. Occasionally, someone would come to Urge convinced they'd been cursed. They'd be experiencing symptoms, headaches, fatigue, bad dreams, and they'd be convinced a rival or enemy had magically attacked them. Urge's approach to cursed cases was diplomatically practical. He'd listen to the person's concerns, take them seriously, and then prepare a countercurse. This might involve creating a protective amulet, or performing a cleansing ritual, or preparing a special drink that was said to break curses. Often, the person would feel better simply because they believed they were now protected. And if the symptoms were psychosomatic, caused by stress and anxiety about the supposed curse, then the curse might actually work by relieving that anxiety. But not everything could be explained by curses and demons. Urge has occasionally encountered conditions so strange, so beyond his experience, that even he wonders if something supernatural is at play. He once treated a man who claimed to hear voices that no one else could hear. The voices told him to do things, sometimes harmful things. The man's family was terrified. They thought he was possessed by a malevolent spirit. Urge didn't know what to make of it. In modern terms, we might call this schizophrenia, or another form of psychosis. But Urge had no framework for understanding mental illness as a brain disorder. All he could do was prepare sedating medicines, poppy extracts, mandrake root to calm the man, and refer the family to a temple where a priest-physician might attempt an exorcism. He never found out what happened to that man. It's one of the cases that still bothers him. Another strange case involved a young woman who couldn't stop shaking. Her whole body trembled constantly. She couldn't eat without spilling food. She couldn't sleep because the shaking wouldn't stop. This might have been a neurological disorder, or possibly a severe anxiety condition manifesting physically. Urge tried everything: muscle-relaxing poultices, calming teas, massage, amulets. Nothing worked. Eventually, a Heka practitioner was called in. He performed an elaborate ritual involving smoke, chanting, and the sacrifice of a dove, and the woman got better. Gradually, over days, the shaking subsided. Was it the ritual? Or had whatever was causing the shaking simply run its course? Urge doesn't know. He's glad the woman recovered, but cases like that remind him how much he doesn't understand. The human body is a mystery. The mind is an even bigger mystery. All he can do is try. One of the strangest aspects of Egyptian magical medicine was the use of spittle. Yes, spit. There are spells where you're instructed to spit on the patient, or spit on an amulet before placing it on them, or even spit in their drink. Spittle was considered to have protective and healing properties. There's even a myth where the sun god Ra created the first gods by spitting them out, so spit was, in a weird way, divine. Urge occasionally uses spittle in his treatments, particularly for eye infections. He'll mix his own saliva with ground malachite and apply it as an ointment. Does it help? Well, human saliva does contain some enzymes with mild antibacterial properties, but probably not enough to make a significant difference. Still, it's part of the tradition, and who is he to argue with centuries of practice? Let's drift now into the actual day-to-day grind of being a physician, the tedium, the repetition, and the occasional moment of genuine medical brilliance. If you've made it this far, and honestly, bless you if you have, probably getting the sense that being an ancient Egyptian doctor was less heroic lifesaver and more tired person doing the best they can with inadequate resources. And that's accurate. Most of Urge's days are not dramatic. They're repetitive. He sees a lot of the same complaints over and over: coughs, rashes, stomach pain, infected cuts, sore backs, toothaches. The toothaches are particularly common and particularly awful. Remember that bread I mentioned? The stuff that everyone ate constantly. It was full of sand and grit from the grinding stones. Over years of eating this bread, people's teeth would get worn down to nubs. Then they'd start to decay. Then they'd abscess. A dental abscess in the ancient world was excruciating and potentially deadly if the infection spread to the jaw or bloodstream. Urge can't do fillings or extractions the way a modern dentist would. Egyptian dentistry was rudimentary. The best he can do is lance an abscess, make a small cut to drain the pus, and then pack the wound with a mixture of honey and ground herbs to prevent further infection. It helps with the immediate pain, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. The tooth is still rotten. Eventually, it might fall out on its own, which is actually the best case scenario. He's treated so many toothaches that he can do it half asleep. The patient lies down, mouth open. Urge examines the tooth, identifies the abscess, usually visible as a swollen, inflamed lump on the gum. He takes his small bronze knife, says a quick prayer to Sekhmet, and makes a swift, precise cut. Pus drains out. The patient groans in relief. Urge packs the wound, gives them some poppy seed tea for the pain, and tells them to rinse their mouth with salt water twice a day. Next patient. A lot of medicine is like this. It's pattern recognition. You've seen this condition before. You know what to do. You do it. You move on. It's not exciting, but it's necessary. Every few days, though, something unusual happens. A patient with a condition Urge hasn't seen before, or a familiar condition with an unexpected complication. These cases force him to think, to experiment, to try different approaches. There was the time a fisherman came in with a wound on his hand that wouldn't heal. It had been weeks. The man had cut his hand on a fishbone, a common enough injury, but instead of healing, the wound had turned black and started to rot. The surrounding flesh was dying. The smell was horrific. Urge recognized this as the beginning of gangrene, though he didn't have that word for it. He called it ukadu of the flesh. Urge knew that if the rot spread, the man would die. The only option was to remove the dead tissue. So he did. Using his copper knife, he carefully cut away the blackened, necrotic flesh, going down to where the tissue was still pink and healthy. It was delicate work. Too shallow, and he'd leave rot behind. Too deep, and he'd hit bone or sever tendons, crippling the hand. The fisherman gritted his teeth through the whole procedure. No anesthesia, except for some strong beer beforehand. After removing the dead tissue, Urge packed the wound with honey and wrapped it tightly. He told the man to come back every day so he could check for signs of further rot. For a week, it was touch and go. But then the wound started to granulate, new tissue forming. The flesh turned pink. The smell faded. The fisherman kept his hand. He never regained full use of it. Some of the tendons had been damaged, but he could still grip a net. He could still work. he would live. That was a good day. Those were the days that reminded Urge why he did this job. Another memorable case involved a child who had swallowed something. The family wasn't sure what. The boy was coughing, choking, turning blue. Urge arrived to find the child in severe distress. He'd seen this before. Something was lodged in the throat, blocking the airway. If it wasn't removed quickly, the child would suffocate. Urge acted fast. He turned the child upside down and struck him firmly between the shoulder blades. Once, twice, 3 times. On the third strike, a small object flew out of the child's mouth, a dried date pit. The boy gasped, coughed, and started crying, which was the most beautiful sound in the world, because crying meant breathing. The family was so grateful they gave Urge a goose, a whole goose. That was an extravagant payment. Urged family ate well that week. But for every case like that, there were 10 where nothing worked. The patient got worse. The fever didn't break. The wound became infected despite all precautions. The pain didn't ease, and Urge would have to watch them die, or nearly die, and there was nothing more he could do. He's developed a kind of emotional armor over the years. He can't get too attached to his patients. If he did, he'd be useless, paralyzed by grief and anxiety. So he maintains a professional distance. He's kind, but not intimate. Competent, but not emotionally entangled. It's the only way to survive in this profession. But sometimes the armor cracks. Like with his own son, the boy who's been sickly since birth. Urge has tried everything, every remedy in his arsenal. Spells, amulets, prayers. He's consulted with other physicians. He's taken the boy to a temple priest who performed a ritual blessing. Nothing has made a lasting difference. The boy is thin, pale, constantly tired. He coughs through the night. Urge knows, in his heart, that his son probably won't live to adulthood, and that knowledge is a constant, dull ache. It's the one patient he can't be professional about. The one case where all his knowledge and skill feel utterly inadequate. His wife doesn't talk about it. She focuses on the 2 healthy children, pours all her energy into them. Maybe that's her way of coping. Urge doesn't judge. Everyone deals with grief in their own way. He throws himself into his work. If he can't save his own son, at least he can save someone else's. Let's drift now into the broader context, what it meant to be ill in ancient Egypt, and how society as a whole dealt with sickness, disability, and death. One thing that might surprise you about ancient Egypt is that they actually had a pretty compassionate approach to disability and chronic illness, at least compared to some other ancient cultures. People with physical disabilities weren't automatically cast out or left to die. We have evidence of individuals with severe disabilities, club feet, spinal deformities, dwarfism, who lived to old age and held respectable positions in society. There are tomb paintings showing people with dwarfism working as jewelers and craftsmen. There are skeletons showing that people with broken bones that healed badly still lived for decades afterward. One mummy, a priest, had such severe arthritis that he would have been barely able to walk, yet he clearly maintained his position and was buried with honors. Part of this comes from Egyptian religious beliefs. The Egyptians believed that everyone had a ka, a life force, and a ba, a personality or soul, and that these were more important than the physical body. The body was just a vessel, so a person with a disabled body could still have a complete core and ba, and was therefore still fully human, still worthy of respect. That's not to say life was easy for disabled people. It wasn't. Manual labor was the norm, and if you couldn't do physical work, your options were limited. But there were niches. Scribes didn't need to be physically strong. Musicians could perform sitting down. Weavers could work, despite mobility issues. Society made some accommodations, even if they weren't formalized the way modern disability accommodations are. Urge has treated people with chronic conditions, arthritis, recurring headaches, digestive problems that never fully resolve. He can't cure these patients, but he can manage their symptoms. He prepares ointments for joint pain, using ingredients like frankincense and myrrh, which have anti-inflammatory properties. He makes headache remedies from willow bark and bryony. For digestive issues, he recommends dietary changes, less bread, more beer, certain herbs, and he listens. This is something modern medicine has lost and is only now rediscovering: the importance of just listening to patients. Urge sits with people. He lets them talk about their pain, their fears, their frustrations. He acknowledges their suffering. Sometimes that's all he can offer, but it matters. Now, let's talk about death, because death was everywhere in ancient Egypt. Infant mortality was staggering. Estimates suggest that nearly half of all children died before the age of 5. Women died in childbirth at alarming rates. Men died in work accidents, from infections, from diseases we can't even identify. Life expectancy was short. Death was a constant presence. But the Egyptians didn't fear death the way many cultures do. They saw it as a transition, not an ending. If you had the proper burial, if the right rituals were performed, if your name was remembered, you'd continue to exist in the afterlife. The Duathi underworld was a real place to them, as real as Thebes or Memphis. Your bar would travel there. You'd be judged by Osiris. And if you'd lived a good life, or if your family could afford the right spells and amulets, you'd pass into paradise. This belief system made death less terrifying, but it also put enormous pressure on the living to perform the correct rituals. Urge has been present at many deathbeds. When it becomes clear that a patient is dying, his role shifts. He's no longer trying to heal. He's facilitating a good death. He makes the person comfortable. He prepares drinks to ease pain and help them sleep. He speaks calmly, reassuringly, about the journey ahead. He's seen people die peacefully, surrounded by family, slipping away quietly. He's also seen people die in agony, thrashing, crying out. Those deaths haunt him. He wonders if there was something more he could have done, some remedy he didn't think of, but deep down, he knows the answer is usually no. Some conditions are simply beyond ancient medicine. After death, the body is turned over to embalmers if the family can afford it. Embalming is expensive. It involves removing the internal organs, desiccating the body with natron, wrapping it in linen bandages soaked in resins. The process takes 70 days and costs a fortune. Only the wealthy get the full treatment. Poorer people get simpler burials. Some just get wrapped in a reed mat and buried in the sand. Urge has mixed feelings about embalmers. On one hand, they're the reason we know so much about Egyptian anatomy. They've spent generations cutting open bodies, removing organs, observing what's inside. Some of that knowledge has trickled down to physicians. On the other hand, embalmers are a separate profession. They don't share their knowledge freely, and Urge sometimes wonders if physicians could learn more by being more involved in the embalming process. But that's not how things are done. One thing that does circulate among physicians is knowledge gleaned from traumatic injuries, wounds from accidents or violence that expose the inside of the body. Urge has seen exposed bones, muscles, organs. He's learned to recognize what's normal and what's damaged. This is how ancient medicine progressed, through observation of trauma. There's a famous medical papyrus, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, that's essentially a trauma surgery manual. It describes 48 different injuries, head wounds, fractures, dislocations, and how to treat them. It's remarkably clinical and rational, with very little magical content. It's organized from head to toe, and for each injury, it lists the diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. Some injuries are classified as an ailment I will treat, others as an ailment I will contest with, and still others as an ailment not to be treated. Urge has never seen this specific papyrus. It's probably in the library of some major temple, but he has learned similar material through his training. He knows which head wounds are survivable and which aren't. He knows that if a skull fracture leaks clear fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, though he doesn't have that term, the patient will probably die. He knows that a broken spine is almost always fatal. This knowledge is both useful and depressing. It's useful because it prevents wasting time on hopeless cases. It's depressing because there are so many hopeless cases. Let's drift now into the strange and sometimes darkly funny aspects of Egyptian medical beliefs, the misconceptions, the bizarre remedies, and the things that make you think, wait, they believed what? Alright, we need to talk about some of the truly weird medical beliefs the ancient Egyptians held. because while we've covered a lot of ground, we haven't fully appreciated just how wild some of this stuff was. And I say this with all affection for these ancient people who were trying their best with the information available. But some of their ideas were, let's say, creative. Let's start with the uterus. The Egyptians believed that the uterus was not a fixed organ. No, they thought it was a sort of free-floating entity that could wander around inside a woman's body, causing all sorts of problems. Headache, wandering uterus, probably pressing on something important, difficulty breathing. Uterus has migrated up toward the lungs. Clearly, this belief led to some fascinating treatments. If a woman presented with symptoms that were attributed to a wandering uterus, the treatment was to lure it back into place using pleasant smells. You'd apply sweet-smelling substances, honey, incense, perfumed oils to the vaginal area, and simultaneously place foul-smelling substances near the woman's nose and mouth. The idea was that the uterus would be attracted to the pleasant smells and repelled by the bad smells, and would therefore migrate back down to where it belonged. Did this work? No, obviously not, because the uterus does not wander. It's attached by ligaments. But you can see the logic, right? Women reported various symptoms. Ancient doctors noticed that these symptoms seem to affect women more than men. The main anatomical difference is the uterus. Therefore, the uterus must be causing the problems, and if it's causing problems in different parts of the body, it must be moving around. Flawless reasoning. If you ignore actual anatomy, then there's the theory about how conception works. The Egyptians believed that semen came from the bones, specifically the spine. They thought that during sex, fluid would travel from the man's spine down into his penis. This is why they thought repeated sexual activity could weaken a man. He was literally draining his bone marrow. The phrase bone tired, that's got ancient roots. They also had fascinating ideas about determining pregnancy and the sex of the unborn child. One method involved having the woman urinate on bags of wheat and barley. If the wheat sprouted, she was pregnant with a girl. If the barley sprouted, it was a boy. If neither sprouted, she wasn't pregnant. Interestingly, modern researchers have actually tested this, and pregnant women's urine does have hormones that can stimulate plant growth more than non-pregnant women's urine. So there might have been a tiny grain of truth to the pregnancy test part. The sex determination part, total nonsense. But hey, 50/50th chance of being right. Another bizarre belief. Crocodile dung as a contraceptive. Yes, really. Women would insert a pessary made of crocodile dung mixed with honey into the vagina before sex. The theory was that it would block or kill the seed. And you know what? It might have worked, not because of anything magical about crocodile dung, but because it would have created an acidic environment hostile to sperm and would have acted as a physical barrier. So, accidentally effective, but for completely wrong reasons, and also deeply unpleasant for everyone involved. Speaking of contraception, the Egyptians also believed that acacia leaves, ground up and mixed with honey, could prevent pregnancy. This is actually not crazy. Acacia ferments into lactic acid, which is spermicidal. So again, accidentally effective. The Egyptians were really good at stumbling onto things that worked without understanding why. Now, let's talk about their understanding of the digestive system. The Egyptians knew that food went in one end and waste came out the other. But they thought that the intestines were basically a sewer system that could back up and poison the body. They believed that rotting food in the intestines released toxic fumes that could travel through the metu and cause disease throughout the body. This is why purging was such a big deal. You had to keep the sewers clear. This theory led to some people engaging in regular enemas as a preventative health measure. There were professional enema administrators. This was a job. The Egyptians were so concerned about intestinal backup that they'd have someone regularly flush out their system with water or oil or various herbal preparations. Did this improve health? Probably not. It might have even caused harm by disrupting the gut's natural bacterial balance, but it made people feel like they were being proactive. There's a particularly hilarious to us remedy for stimulating hair growth that I mentioned earlier, but it's worth revisiting in detail. The recipe calls for fat from various animals: lion, hippo, crocodile, cat, snake, ibex. You're supposed to mix these all together into an ointment and rub it on your head. Now, setting aside the logistical nightmare of acquiring lion fat, the reasoning here is pure sympathetic magic. Lions have manes, hippos have bristly hair. Therefore, their essence will cause your hair to grow. It's magical thinking, but you can follow the logic. And then there are the remedies for impotence. One of them involves mixing ground-up baby mice with honey and eating it. I wish I were making this up. Another remedy suggests rubbing the penis with a mixture of honey and ground-up beetles. Why? Who knows? Maybe someone tried it once. It worked, probably coincidentally, and it got written down as official medical advice. The Egyptians also believed that certain substances had inherent power based on their associations. Anything red, for example, was associated with blood and therefore could be used to treat blood disorders. Black substances were associated with death and decay and could be used to draw out poisons. This is, again, sympathetic magic. Like cures like, or like attracts like. The underlying logic is magical, but it created a systematic approach to pharmacology, which is something. One remedy that shows up repeatedly in medical papyri is milk of a woman who has borne a male child. This milk was considered especially powerful and was used to treat eye infections, burns, and various ailments. Why milk from a mother of sons specifically? Because male children were more valued, and therefore their mother's milk was considered more potent. It's sexist and weird, but it made sense within their worldview. And then there's the urine and feces. We've talked about using animal dung, but the Egyptians also used human urine for various medicinal purposes. Aged urine contains ammonia, which is antibacterial and can be used for cleaning wounds. So, once again, accidentally effective. They didn't know about ammonia, but they knew that aged urine worked better than fresh for certain applications. Observation, trial and error, pattern recognition, that's the foundation of pre-scientific medicine. Urge doesn't question most of these remedies. They're what he was taught. They're what everyone uses. But he has noticed that some remedies work more reliably than others. Honey always seems to help wounds. Willow bark reliably reduces fever and pain. Certain herbs consistently soothe stomach upset. He doesn't know why these things work, but he's learned to trust them. Other remedies are more hit or miss. The complex ones involving dozens of ingredients, he suspects those work mostly through placebo effect. But if a patient believes a remedy will help, and it does help, does it matter why? Urge isn't sure. He just knows that giving people hope is part of his job. There's also an element of showmanship to being a physician. The incantations, the ritual preparation of medicines, the placement of amulets, it's all theater. In a way, it creates an atmosphere of authority and mystery. It signals to the patient that something powerful and important is happening, and that psychological impact can't be discounted. Urge has seen patients improve simply because they believed they would. He's also seen patients decline because they'd given up hope. The mind and body are connected in ways he doesn't fully understand. All he knows is that treating the mind, offering comfort, reassurance, hope is just as important as treating the body. Let's drift now into what happens when medicine fails, and how Urge and his community cope with the inevitable reality of death. There's a family Urge has been treating for years. The father is a potter, makes decent ceramics, sells them at the market. The mother weaves baskets. They have 4 children, or they had 4. The youngest, a girl of about 3, developed a fever 5 days ago. Urge was called immediately. He's been attending to her every day since. The fever won't break. The child is delirious, crying out for water but unable to keep. Continue 1837, anything down. Her skin is hot and dry. Her eyes are glazed. Urge has tried everything. Cooling baths, willow bark tea, honey and herbs, incantations, amulets. He's called in a priest to perform additional blessings. Nothing works. The child is dying, and everyone knows it. On the 6th day, Urge arrives to find the mother sitting beside the child's sleeping mat, silent tears streaming down her face. The father stands in the doorway, arms crossed, staring at nothing. The other children huddle in a corner, confused and frightened. The little girl's breathing is shallow and irregular. Urge kneels beside the child and checks her pulse. It's weak, thready, her skin has taken on a grayish tinge. He knows these signs. He's seen them too many times. This is the end. He sits with the family. He doesn't say much. What is there to say? He holds the mother's hand. He places a cool cloth on the child's forehead, a gesture of comfort rather than treatment. He murmurs a prayer to Osiris, asking the god to welcome this small soul into the afterlife. The child dies just before sunset. One moment she's breathing, the next she's not. It's quiet, peaceful in its way. The mother lets out a low, keening wail. The father turns and walks out of the house. He'll cry later, privately. Right now he needs to move, to do something, anything. Urge helps prepare the body for burial. He closes the child's eyes, straightens her limbs. He wraps her in the family's best piece of linen. Not much, but it's what they have. The family can't afford embalming, so the child will be buried quickly, before decay sets in. He stays with the family through the evening, until neighbors arrive to help with the morning rituals. Then he walks home slowly, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. This never gets easier. Every child who dies feels like a personal failure, even though he knows rationally that he did everything he could. When he gets home, he hugs his own children tightly. His youngest son coughs, and Urge's heart clenches. Not yet, he thinks. Please, not yet. The psychological toll of being a physician in a world with such high mortality is immense. Urge has developed coping mechanisms. He focuses on the patients he can help. He reminds himself that some death is inevitable, that his job is to fight death but not to expect victory every time. He talks to other physicians occasionally, sharing the burden of difficult cases. But there are nights when he can't sleep, when he lies awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision he made. Should he have tried a different remedy? Should he have called in a priest-physician sooner? Should he have done more, somehow, even though he doesn't know what more would look like? His wife knows better than to try to console him on these nights. She just lies beside him, a quiet presence. Sometimes that's enough. The community copes with death through ritual. The funeral rites, the mourning period, the offerings to the dead, these aren't just religious observances. They're psychological necessities. They give people something to do with their grief. They create structure in the chaos of loss. And they reinforce the belief that death isn't the end, that the deceased continues to exist in another form. Urge participates in these rituals when invited. He attends funerals for patients he's treated. He pours libations. He speaks well of the deceased. It's another aspect of his role in the community, bearing witness to life and death, being present through both. But there are some deaths that hit harder than others. Last year, a woman Urge had known since childhood died in childbirth. She was his age, healthy, should have been fine. The labor went on too long. The baby was too big. Urge tried everything. He tried to turn the baby. He tried to ease it out. Nothing worked. Eventually, he had to cut the mother open to save the child, knowing it would kill her. The baby survived. The mother bled out within minutes. The husband held Urge responsible. He shouted, accused him of murder, said a real physician would have saved both. Urge took it silently. Let the man rage. Grief needs an outlet. Better for him to rage at Urge than to turn that anger inward. But the accusations stung. They still sting, because part of Urge wonders if the husband is right. These are the cases that make physicians quit, the ones that break your spirit. Urge has known colleagues who stopped practicing after particularly traumatic cases. One simply couldn't bear the weight anymore. He gave away his tools and became a farmer. Another turned to drink and died young, his liver destroyed. Urge hasn't quit. He's thought about it, but he hasn't. Because for every death, there's a life saved. For every child that dies, there's a child that lives. And as long as that's true, he has to keep trying. He thinks about his legacy sometimes. When he dies, and he will, probably within the next decade or two, if he's lucky, what will he leave behind? His children, certainly. Maybe one of them will become a physician. But beyond that, will anyone remember the lives he saved? The patients he comforted? The hours he spent sitting with the sick and dying? Probably not. Most people don't remember their doctors, not in the long term. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to be remembered. Maybe the point is just to do the work, day after day, patient after patient, until you can't anymore. To be a small link in the long chain of people trying to ease suffering and push back against death. That's a kind of immortality too. Not personal, but collective. Every physician who trains an apprentice passes on knowledge. Every remedy that works gets written down and shared. Every small advancement builds on what came before. Urge is part of that tradition, and that matters more than individual recognition. Let's drift now toward the end of our long night's journey through ancient Egyptian medicine. Let's talk about what Urge thinks about on quiet evenings, when the work is done and he has time to reflect. It's evening again, another day finished. Urge sits outside his home, watching the sun set over the Nile. The sky is painted in shades of orange and purple and deepest blue. The evening breeze is a relief after the heat of the day. In the distance, someone is playing a lute, the notes drifting across the quiet streets. Urge thinks about his life. He's in his mid-40s now, which makes him old by Egyptian standards. Most men his age are dead or close to it, but he's been lucky. No major accidents, no serious illnesses, just the usual aches and pains of aging stiff joints in the morning, eyes that don't focus as well as they used to, teeth that are starting to loosen. He wonders how many more years he has. 5, 10. Will he live to see his children grown? Will he live to meet grandchildren? Or will tomorrow bring some random disaster, a snakebite, a fall, an infection that ends everything? He doesn't fear death, not really. He's seen too much of it to find it frightening. What he fears is dying badly, lingering in pain, becoming a burden to his family. He hopes, when his time comes, it will be quick, in his sleep, ideally, or quickly enough that there's no time for terror. But that's not tonight's concern. Tonight, he's alive. His family is alive. There's bread for tomorrow. Life continues. He thinks about what he's learned over his years of practice. The human body is fragile. Disease is everywhere. Death is inevitable. But people are also remarkably resilient. He's seen people survive injuries that should have killed them. He's seen children recover from fevers that seemed certain to be fatal. He's seen the body heal itself in ways that seem almost miraculous. The biggest lesson, though, is humility. He doesn't know as much as he thought he did when he was young. Every year brings new mysteries, new conditions he can't explain, new reminders that the body's workings are beyond his full comprehension. The older physicians, the ones who've been practicing for decades, seem to know even less than he does, not because they're ignorant, but because they've lived long enough to understand how vast their ignorance is. There's a kind of wisdom in that, in knowing what you don't know, in being honest about the limits of your knowledge. Urge has stopped pretending to have all the answers. When a patient asks him why they're sick, he'll offer his best guess, but he'll also admit that he might be wrong. When a treatment doesn't work, he'll say so and try something else. This honesty seems to reassure patients. Oddly enough, they trust him more when he admits uncertainty than when he pretends to know everything. Maybe because it feels more real, more human. He thinks about the gods. Does he believe? Really believe? That's complicated. He performs the rituals. He makes the offerings. He recites the prayers. But does he think that Sekhmet is literally listening to him? That Thoth will personally intervene to guide his hands? He's not sure. What he does know is that the rituals provide structure. They give meaning to what he does. They connect his daily work to something larger, more ancient, more significant than just one man treating one patient. And if the gods don't exist, or don't care, or are too busy with larger cosmic concerns to bother with individual humans, well, the rituals still serve a purpose. They comfort the patient. They focus Urge's mind. They honor the tradition of physicians, stretching back centuries. That's enough. He thinks about his profession. Is he a healer? Sometimes. Is he a technician, just following established procedures? Often. Is he a comforter, offering hope and presence in the face of suffering? Always. Is he a witness, bearing testimony to the fundamental vulnerability of human existence? Yes, all of these. The role is too complex to reduce to a single definition. What he wishes, more than anything, is that he knew more, that there were better remedies, that he could do surgery without killing the patient from infection, that he could see inside the body without cutting it open, that he understood what caused disease at a fundamental level. He knows these wishes are futile. Knowledge comes slowly, over generations. Maybe his children's children will know more. Maybe, centuries from now, physicians will look back at his era and shake their heads at the crude methods, the magical thinking, the sheer ignorance, but they'll be standing on his shoulders, on the shoulders of every physician who came before. Knowledge is cumulative. Every small observation, every remedy that works, every technique that improves outcomes, it all adds up, slowly, too slowly for any individual to see much progress in their lifetime, but progress nonetheless. His son coughs inside the house, and urged philosophical musings evaporate. He goes inside. The boy is sitting up, struggling to breathe. Urge prepares a steam inhalation, boiling water with herbs. Hold your head over it, breathe deeply. It helps. A little. The boy's breathing eases. He lies back down. Urge sits beside him, one hand on his son's thin chest, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. This is what it comes down to, isn't it? Not grand theories or ancient traditions or the favor of gods. Just this. One person trying to help another, one breath at a time. His wife brings him a cup of beer. He drinks it slowly. His son falls asleep. Urge watches him for a while longer, then carefully stands and walks back outside. The stars are out now, countless points of light in the vast darkness. The Egyptians have names for all the constellations, stories about them. They navigate by these stars, plant crops by them, build temples aligned to them. The stars are eternal, unchanging, a reminder that individual human lives are brief, insignificant, and yet also somehow precious. Urge thinks about all the people he's treated over the years. Hundreds, probably, thousands, maybe, if you count brief consultations. How many did he save? How many would have died without his intervention? How many died despite it? He doesn't know. The accounting is impossible. All he knows is that he tried. Every day, he tried. And tomorrow, he'll wake up. He'll eat bread and drink beer. He'll gather his supplies. He'll go see patients. Someone will have a fever. Someone will have broken a bone. Someone will be dying. And he'll do what he can, with the knowledge he has, in the time available, until he can't do it anymore. That's the job. That's always been the job. From the first person who mixed herbs to ease a friend's pain, to the physicians of Urge's time, to the doctors of every era that will come after. The details change. The understanding deepens. The tools improve. But the fundamental act remains the same. One person trying to ease the suffering of another. It's not glamorous. It's often frustrating. Sometimes it's heartbreaking. But it matters. Even on the days when it feels futile, it matters. Because suffering is real, and trying to alleviate it is worthwhile. Even when you fail more often than you succeed. Urge finishes his beer. He says a quiet prayer, not to any specific god. Just a general wish for health and peace for his family, his patients, his community. Then he goes inside, lies down on his sleeping mat beside his wife, and closes his eyes. Tomorrow will bring new patients, new problems, new opportunities to help, or fail to help, but to try, regardless, to witness, to be present, to do what can be done. That's enough. It has to be. Sleep comes slowly, as it often does these days. But it comes, and Urge dreams, as he sometimes does, of a world where physicians know more, can do more, can save more. A world where children don't die from simple fevers, where women survive childbirth, where a cut doesn't become a death sentence, where pain can be eased and disease can be cured. It's a beautiful dream, impossible, probably, but beautiful. And in the morning he'll wake up and return to the real world, with all its limits and sorrows and small victories. He'll pick up his basket of remedies. He'll go treat the sick. He'll comfort the dying. He'll welcome new life into the world, knowing that some of those lives will be brief and others will be long, and he can't predict which will be which. He'll do this until he can't anymore, and then someone else will take his place, carrying on the endless work of trying to heal. to help, to make the suffering just a little bit less. That's the story of urge. That's the story of medicine. Not a tale of heroic triumphs, but a quiet, persistent effort to push back against entropy and suffering and death, knowing that you'll ultimately lose, but trying anyway, because what else is there to do? And on that note, I think we should drift off now. I hope you've enjoyed this long, winding journey through ancient Egyptian medicine, or at the very least, I hope it's helped you sleep. If you've made it this far and you're still awake, well, I'm honestly impressed. But maybe close your eyes now, rest, dream of simpler times when the biggest medical concern was whether your doctor was using fresh crocodile dung or the stale stuff. Sweet dreams, everyone. See you next time for another dive into history's strange and fascinating corners. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, give this video a like. Subscribe for more history that helps you sleep, and leave a comment telling me what historical topic you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for listening, and good night.